Welcome to the Vision Driven Marriage Podcast. If you're struggling in your marriage, or maybe you're wondering if it's even salvageable, before you give up or before you let things get too hard, let us come alongside you and help you solidify your marriage. We offer biblical encouragement and insight to help you strengthen your marriage. Hi, we're Doug and Leslie Davis, and this is the Vision Driven Marriage Podcast. We're so glad that you're here today. We've had the privilege for almost a year now to be able to share things that you can do in your life that'll help you be able to minister to your spouse very specifically. We've encouraged people clean up your own side of the street, start with what you can do, don't have expectations of your spouse that are unrealistic, but instead look at what you can do in your life to make your marriage better. And those are all really important things that we're really, really grateful that we've had the opportunity to share with you. But today, we're going to be looking at the other side of that coin. While we still want to encourage you, make sure you take care of the things that you can do in your life. Today's going to be just a little bit different.
You know, generally we talk about loving your spouse, and it's your responsibility to love your spouse as we're commanded by Scripture. But today we're going to look at how you can influence your relationship and be more loving.
Right, because we know that one of the commands that God has given to us is to make sure that we love one another, love your spouse. You know, we're even supposed to, as Christians, we're even supposed to love our enemies. And we hope that there isn't a time in your marriage where you feel that way, but there may have even been those times. God wants us to love. He wants us to love our spouse. He wants us to love the way we've been loved. We understand that. But today we're going to be looking, what can you do to help it be a little easier for your spouse when they're struggling with stress? How can you allow it to be a little easier for them to do the things they're supposed to do?
Well, I think, a lot of times we don't think about the influence that we have in our relationships, or we don't realize that that influence can be our take on connecting with our spouse. Mm-hmm. Like, I can influence you on how connected you feel to me by being more lovable or being kind or being gentle, in those situations. Because if I'm not kind or if I'm not gentle or whatever, I can imagine that the thought process is, you're being really hard to love right now.
Right. And we want to make sure that we draw a clear distinction right now up front. What we're talking about is being able to be a positive influence in the life of your spouse so that it's easier for them to do the things that they're wanting to do as they change their behavior. We are not talking about doing something for the purpose of manipulating your spouse. We want to draw a distinction right now. We're not talking about if I do these things, I can manipulate my spouse to act better. Instead, what we're talking about is when I know my spouse is trying to love me differently or better than they have been, one of the things that I can do to make that easier is I can be more lovable. Now, I know that, we've talked before about the importance that you have do your part. And I know Leslie has mentioned many times about how trust is something that's significantly easier when the spouse is being trustworthy. Mm-hmm. So if I'm trustworthy, it's easier for her to trust me. We're talking about the same kind of idea here. We know that we're supposed to love each other. Sometimes we've had struggles. During times of stress, it becomes difficult for us to love the way we ought to. So especially during times of stress. And we've got holidays coming up. We've got, all of the fall, winter holidays coming up. Stress could be a real part of what you're going to be facing. It could become part of your reality. So it's a really good time for us to look at how can I help my spouse love me better by making sure that I'm doing things that make me more lovable.
So we're going to run down a list of 5 things that are pretty common and they're pretty general, right? And these are ways that when you put them into practice, you can be more lovable, but it's still your spouse's responsibility to love. We're not negating where the responsibility lies. We're just helping our spouse have the opportunity to love easier.
Making it easier for them to be able to do the things they're wanting to be able to do well. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe instead of talking about how, being more lovable will help them love, one of the ways for you to look at it and to think about it, is that there's things that I could do that would actually cause my spouse to close down. There's things that I could do that would cause her to back away from me, to not want to continue to push in to some kind of a problem we need to solve, or maybe not communicate the way that we would like to be able to. And so instead of saying, hey, step back by my behavior, what I'm doing is I'm making it easier for her to lean in and love me more.
Absolutely. Okay, so those 5 things are: 1, communicate effectively; 2, execute acts of kindness; 3, practice gratitude; 4, create an environment of mutual support. I love that one, by the way. Create an environment of mutual support; and 5, pray together.
Now, with the first one, we have talked about communicating probably in 75% of the podcasts we've done, maybe more. I haven't actually checked the percentage, but I know it's really, really high, because you all know, just like we do, communication is key to having a successful relationship, whatever relationship you're talking about, but especially in a marriage relationship. But here, we're going to be looking at some specific things you can do when you communicate that allow your spouse to draw close to you rather than feeling like they're being pushed away because of the things you're doing.
And I think a lot, the research supports that communication is one of the biggest, I don't want to say complaints, but the biggest problems that couples experience within their marriage is like, we're not communicating well. So one of the ways that you can be more lovable to your spouse is when they're trying to communicate a point, you can actively listen to what they're saying and reflect back that you've heard them. That doesn't mean that you agree with them. You may or may not agree with them. But actively listening and reflecting back to them that you have heard them and validate their feelings, that is a way to show that you guys are connected, that there's and it creates that connection that says, okay, I'm safe in this relationship, and therefore able to love better.
Right. And so the active listening is going to be something that truly allows your spouse to push in instead of feeling like they're being pushed away. But there's another thing in communication that you can do that will allow you to be more lovable, rather than saying, hey, step back. And, we don't want to be prickly. We want our spouse to be invited in. And let's just be blunt. There's times where we're prickly. There's times where we say, I don't have time, back off, and it damages the relationship. Stress is one of the key factors that can cause that prickly behavior. And so being actively engaged is one huge thing. Another huge thing in communicating is be able to say what you mean so that you can have a deeper conversation.
Doug and I want to break in right here in the middle of this episode and tell you about a very special free resource that we've created for you.
We know that most couples don't know how to begin a journey to spiritual intimacy. Some couples are just trying to stay on the journey to physical intimacy.
Praying together is one of the most rewarding disciplines of spiritual intimacy. It's the cornerstone, and can deepen your love for your spouse and your commitment to your marriage, and that strengthens emotional and physical intimacy.
It's also one of the hardest to actually be disciplined at. Things come up, excuses bear weight, time gets away from us. That's why we developed this brief guide to praying with your spouse. It includes how to overcome common barriers and 7 things to consider.
Just as there are many reasons why it's difficult to pray together, there are equally as many ways to push through the barriers and incorporate a habit that will draw the two of you close to God and closer to each other.
We know firsthand, and we're living proof that spiritual intimacy can be developed by praying with each other.
To get this free guide called Praying with Your Spouse, a brief guide, just follow the link below.
And now, back to our show.
One of the things that happens when we deal with stress, one of the things that makes us harder to invite our spouse to love us, so it makes it more difficult, we're not inviting our spouse to love us, is when they feel like they're being rejected by us.
Then one of the other ways, or the other things to be aware of when you communicate, is that when you're under stress, you're more apt to snap out or lash out at your spouse because that stress is, is active in your emotional being. And so one of the ways to kind of combat that is that when you're communicating, you can use I feel statements. I feel frustrated when this happens and I need this to happen, so that you're not snapping out about the situation or about the way you feel. You're acting in an honest and appropriate, respectful way.
Right. And also, one of the other reactions, because snapping is a pretty common reaction, the other really common reaction is just to withdraw, to kind of shut down. And that also says things that aren't necessarily true. And so if you can communicate in those cases by saying, I really don't know, I need to think about it for a minute, I need to process this, instead of just processing it and make your spouse feel like they're withdrawing from me, could be absolutely huge.
So what you've noticed in the examples that we've given is that there is a focus, and this is the point. So if you take away anything from this section of this podcast, take away this. The focus is on the relationship being a priority, not what's causing the stress or not how you feel about the stress, but it's in protecting that connection and protecting that relationship, and that's what's important.
Because the stress is real, and it could be for a lot of different reasons, and it can be particularly difficult, like we said, during the holiday seasons, because you might be stressed for a totally different reason than your spouse, but you might be stressed at the same time they are. And then things get really, 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 really difficult.
And we're going to talk in a minute about how creating a mutual environment of support can help alleviate some of that stress that's an external stress.
Right.
But go ahead.
I was going to say, but first we're going to talk about how you can execute acts of kindness. So please go ahead and introduce that concept to us.
Okay, so executing acts of kindness, I think this is a skill that sometimes we don't think about because it when we're on autopilot, it's not, intentional acts of kindness are so much more powerful than just going through your normal day on autopilot. And I think even some of the acts of service that we do on autopilot, sometimes we can get away from the fact that we're actually thinking about them as being acts of kindness. For instance, every morning when he gets ready to go to school, I fill his coffee thermos, right? Well, because I do that every day and it feels mundane to me, it's not so much an act of kindness as a routine now at this point, because we've been married for 33 years and I've filled countless thousands of times his thermos, right? But I'll bet that you don't think that that's a random act of kindness, or that that's random every morning, that you think about that as being an act of kindness.
I am fully capable of filling my own thermos and coffee cup. But every day, again, even though it is routine at this point, it doesn't feel like routine because I know that that's something she doesn't have to do. I don't need her to do it. She's doing it because she wants to and because she loves me. And that kind of kindness is a great way to start your day. Now, you need to think about your own spouse. What can I do that would be kind? Because we know that kindness is one of the things that God wants to produce in your life as a Christian. It says it's one of the fruit. It's part of the fruit that you'll see that's fruit of the Spirit if you read in Galatians. And so, for example, if there's a day where there is frost on her windshield and I know that half an hour after I leave she's going to be driving somewhere. On the days when I'm not always able to, but I'll scrape her windshield before I go. Now, it has become particularly less necessary because just like probably all of you, she has a car that from inside the house, she can start and run the defrost.
Remote start.
However, when she starts it from outside, she usually looks and sees that the windshield's been scraped. And so even though it was unnecessary, it was kindness. Now, maybe it's one of those things where there's a phone conversation where your spouse is in the midst of a difficult conversation, whether it's work-related or something going on with a friend. And as they're in the middle of that conversation, as you walk by doing the things that you already need to do, just rubbing the shoulder, just to let them know that, I realize what you're going through. Something as simple as that act of kindness is something that truly, truly will allow and assist your spouse and being able to demonstrate the love they want to demonstrate towards you.
Absolutely. You know what we forgot? We forgot to mention the scripture that goes along with communicating effectively. And in this case, it would be, let no unwholesome talk come from your mouth.
Ephesians 4:29.
That's it. That's it. So that link will be in the show notes.
And so, and again, with the kindness that we're looking at, there's so many things that you can do. And we want to encourage you to just, spend some time praying about, how can I be kind? Because when I'm kind, not only will it encourage my spouse, not only will it help my spouse, but it will draw my spouse closer to me instead of me pushing them away. And again, during the times when people are stressed, during the times when there's struggles, being able to be more lovable allows your spouse a better opportunity to love you the way your spouse wants to love you.
I am introducing this next one, which is practicing gratitude. I was recently talking to a new friend of mine whom I was on a discovery call with to be on her podcast, which is called Finding God in Your Pain. We talked about a video clip that she had seen, and it really struck my heart because it shows an example of this next one, which is practicing gratitude, and how when you don't do it, it can really undermine the connection in the marriage and really make you as a spouse seem unlovable or really hard to love at the time. But the video clip that she described was this, and I will try to find the link to it and put it in the show notes so that you can also see the video clip, but I can't promise that I'll get that done. I might not be able to find it. But here was kind of the rundown of the video clip. A husband and a wife were getting ready to leave the house, and he was carrying a pitcher of something liquid. And as he was exiting the house, they were on their way someplace. And as they were exiting the house, he fell or tripped down the stairs and spilled what was in the pitcher. Well, in my mind, because I haven't seen the video clip, she just told the story. But in my mind, they're on their way to like a church fellowship or something, and he's carrying a great big pitcher of sweet tea. That's how my mind played it out, right? Well, instead of her having gratitude for the fact that he's helping her carry things out to the car, her initial response was, great, now we're going to be late, because she'd have to go make more tea or whatever. And they were on their way, someplace important. I just pictured it being church. But her attitude was not, thank you for your help. Hey, let's work to fix this problem. Or I appreciate the fact that you were carrying things out to the car for me. That kind of thing. Her attitude was, great, what you did just inconvenienced me completely because now XYZ, I have to make more tea or whatever, clean up the mess or whatever. And so it really just expounded on the fact of what can happen when you don't practice gratitude, because I don't know that there's any middle ground. A lot of these things that we talk about, there's a gray area where it's not that something is happening or not that something is not happening, but that there's this gray area. But if you are not practicing gratitude, you're probably undermining the connection in your relationship. It's an either or. There's no gray area.
Right. And well, those of you who are thinking, well, maybe I wouldn't be frustrated and upset. There's one other thing that seems to be the opposite of gratitude as well, and that's when you just take things for granted and you don't recognize the daily things that you truly have to be grateful for. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the mess ups; it's not acknowledging the things that every day that you have to be so thankful for, because there are those things. And right now, if you took the time, even in the midst of your most difficult days as a married couple, even in the hardest day you had, there was something that you could be grateful for. Mm-hmm. It may have been something like, at least I didn't have to listen to them today. But you've got something to be grateful for. And as you start to have a heart of gratitude, you'll start to recognize the things that you really have to be grateful for. And that's when you'll get to see the opportunities. Now, I want to encourage you, and all of you, but especially men, because we tend to have this be a truth in our life more often than the ladies do. But I want to encourage ladies, you too. Think about all the times where you have thought something that you were so thankful for that your spouse did for you. Maybe it was simply, I just love the way they smile, and I'm so grateful that they smile a lot. Or it may be something that they've done for you. It may be something about their demeanor. It might be the way that they treat your children. It might be the way that they interact with other people, or how wonderful they are as they prepare for things, that nothing seems to, that they're unflappable. Nothing seems to bother them. You've thought things over and over and over and over and over again. But if you're like me, you don't say the majority of the things you think. Having a heart of gratitude is going to start by saying more of the things you're grateful for than you currently do. You don't need to say them all, because there's throughout the entire day, you're constantly thinking positive things about your spouse if you're in a place where your marriage is starting to become really good. You don't have to say everything, but being able to say some of the things you think that you haven't been saying will be a step in the right direction toward being a person who practices gratitude better than you have been.
And I think that practicing of gratitude really feeds into our next one, which is creating an atmosphere of mutual support.
Yeah.
Because when you know as a spouse that you're appreciated for the things that you do, then that will facilitate doing more good things. I mean, it's just a natural progression. And when you're expressing gratitude for the things that your spouse does, that in turn helps your spouse be able to love you more. That makes you more lovable, right? But when you're stressed, that it's really hard to experience gratitude, to be thankful in those times when you're really stressed, because when we're stressed, we're focused on our own stress, we're focused on our own expectations, and that makes it hard. So it has to be something that is incredibly intentional.
And you have to force yourself to slow down. But when you create an environment of mutual support, there's going to be some really important things. And so what are the things that you think are most important for you? And then I'll share a couple of the things in mutual support that have been a blessing to me.
Well, I think, when you think about mutual support, there again, you have to intentionally focus on the relationship as a priority,
Right.
And understand that the husband and the wife, that you as spouses are more, I'm at a loss for a word. Strength is the word that comes to mind. You're more strong, which that's not the right word, stronger together than you are individually. And so creating an environment of mutual support isn't just about supporting each other, but it's about knowing that your spouse is supporting you.
And if you just look at the term itself, mutual support, in its basic context, I will be here for you, and I know that you will always be here for me, is going to be something that, especially during times of stress, especially during times where your spouse really needs a little bit of, and then you can fill in the blank. It may be encouragement, it may be help, it may be time. But they need something. And so one of the things that you can do, this is going to go back to communication again. Doesn't everything go back to communication? But to know that you have each other, I've got you, I'm here for you, and I know that you're here for me, is going to often be able to be communicated simply with a question, and then the willingness to be able to give an honest answer instead of what you think your spouse wants to hear. You know what the question's going to be? Is there anything I can do to help you? Because it may be, yes, get out of my way. That's not a rejection. That's not a rejection. I know that my spouse has my back right now. I just need to get this done. I need time. Get out of my way. Do you see how mutual support is something?
Not that we've ever said that to each
other.
Right,
but sometimes it is, yes, help me carry this. Yeah. Sometimes it is, sit down and listen to me.
And sometimes it is, give me space.
Sometimes it's give me space. Yeah. But the beautiful part is when you know my spouse isn't just here to help me in the way that my spouse thinks is right. My spouse is here to help me in whatever it is that I need. Right. And you can, sometimes all it is me needing to know that she recognizes something's going on, especially remember during this time where stress is involved. She sees that something's going on. She asks, is there anything that I can do? And sometimes the answer is no, but thank you for asking. That kind, because then she's practicing kindness. I get to express the gratitude. I don't really need that help, but I know that I have it. You'd be amazed at how a consistent knowing that my spouse will help me and my spouse knows that I will help her is something that will truly allow you to draw your spouse closer instead of pushing them away during a time of stress, to be more lovable when your spouse is wanting to love you during a time of stress.
I think, and a good example of that in our relationship that actually just happened this last week, actually, was I had a pretty heavy relationship thing happen that I needed to process through.
Right.
And being a counselor, most of the time it's pretty easy for me to just sit down and process my own stuff, right? Well, this stirred some emotion and triggered some things in me that I was really having a difficult time, not difficult time, but a concerning time processing, right? Well, he gets home from school, which is his high school teaching, so that's his day job. He gets home from school and he can tell that I'm upset, right? I knew he needed to leave to go see his parents just shortly after school, right? But he sat down and took the time to ask me questions and help me process through what was concerning me. And it made him incredibly lovable at that point because I knew that he was sacrificing time. That he had planned. He was changing his plans in order to provide something that I needed. And it made him incredibly lovable. I love you for that. That was awesome.
Well, and see, that's one of the things that is, mutual is the key term there. You need to do your part. You can't make your spouse do their part. But when you do, show your spouse that you're there to support them. And even if that means, no, I don't need anything, thank you, let me have some time, and you give them time. When your spouse knows that you will provide them support, whatever that looks like, even if the support simply means you go do what you need to do, that will help you draw close to each other in an amazing way. We want to strongly encourage you to do that. But we've got one more we need to look at today.
When Doug and I started doing this together, it was probably the number one thing that helped solidify our marriage, and that's praying together. I really believe that when a husband and wife can submit themselves together before the Lord in prayer, that the Lord blesses that in a supernatural way that is really hard to explain in any type of media. I mean, I've read blog posts about it, I've read books about it, and it still doesn't come close to explaining the miracle of how the Holy Spirit brings two people together in prayer that is so intimate and so amazing. I don't even have the right word to explain it, but amazing is the word that comes to mind. That when you two are praying together, God will bless that.
Right. And, there's lots and lots of different things that you can do to be able to pray together. One of the things I'll remind you all of, if you've watched our other episodes specifically on prayer, we made sure to bring this out. I need to bring it out again. If you begin the process of praying together and you haven't been, you will find what look to you like failures before you do it well the majority of the time, because Satan loves to attack a couple that prays together. So don't think if we don't do it at the same time every day we failed, or if we don't pray a certain way, or if we don't pray the way the example in this book we just read worked,
or if
that
we
somehow
don't
we
both
failed.
pray, right? Because sometimes we don't both pray.
Right. And so there isn't a wrong way. The only thing that's the wrong way is not. So don't feel like a failure. Continue to pray. And one of the other things for us to encourage you to do as we're looking at the being more lovable, think about the situation with, it's a stressful time. My spouse is struggling. I want to pray with them. Sometimes praying together is going to be a very, very, very fast prayer. It doesn't have to always be the big detailed prayer where you submit yourselves humbly before God as a couple. It may be something as simple as, Lord, my wife is really struggling right now. Just give her wisdom and show her that you love her. Amen. Maybe that, but praying together, knowing it's going to feed into almost every single one of the things that we've already looked at. Because when you pray together, you're going to be demonstrating to your spouse your mutual support for one another, and the fact that you realize you need to give it to God as well. You're going to be able to practice gratitude because, as you pray for your spouse, you're grateful for the opportunity. Your spouse is grateful for the prayers. It lets you execute an act of kindness, because praying for one another, especially when you're stressed, is something that's remarkably kind and very, very, very lovable. But it's also going to allow you to communicate quickly but concisely and importantly that you matter. I see what's going on, and so I'm going to do something that I value. And you'd be amazed at how a quick prayer communicates so very, very much to your spouse.
Absolutely. And if you feel like you're having trouble praying with your spouse, I want you to click the link in the show notes, because we have created a prayer guide that can help you overcome the most common barriers to praying together. So check that out in the show notes and get that free guide.
And so again, we just wanted to let you all know that we are so grateful for you. We are thankful for you. We're praying for you. But also, we wanted you to know that with the stress that comes up, and especially during the holiday season, there's a lot of opportunity that we have to do something we haven't talked about much. Yes, you need to do your part. You need to clean up your side of the street. You need to focus on what you can do as a spouse. But this is an opportunity during the holiday season, during the stressful season, to be able to do things that will assist your spouse, will help your spouse to be able to love you the way they should, by you simply doing things that make you more lovable.
Absolutely.
Again, we're thankful for you. We're Doug and Leslie Davis. This is the Vision Driven Marriage Podcast, and we are praying that God will continue to solidify your marriage.